Hello dear students, welcome back once again at our e-classes, and today once again we are going to take a very interesting, hugely popular story, The Open Window. It is written by H Munro. So welcome you all to this class, and I hope you will enjoy this story, the critical summary, the important points, all we are going to discuss. Dear friends, first of all, let's have an introduction to the writer H Munro or Hector Hugh Munro. He is popularly known by his pseudonym, his pen name Saki. Okay, Saki is his popular name, and he was born in present day Myanmar, which was part of British India, where his father was posted in the police department. After the death of his mother, the family was sent back to England, and a very interesting thing about Munro or Saki is that he himself joined this particular department. He was posted in Myanmar also, but later, because he suffered from some diseases, he went back to England, and there he adopted the career of a journalist and short story writer. After publishing some of his stories, he became quite popular because once again, like we read about Catherine Mansfield, he also experimented with this short story form. He was quite influenced by writers like O. Henry, and in his stories he included various elements. As he basically belonged to Scotland, so he is a Scottish writer. He is known for stories marked with wit and power of fantastic invention. This is his highlight. This is his special quality. In all of his stories, we find that sometimes he mixes realism and some kind of superstitious, magical or quirky element, which makes these stories a fantastic sort of reading. Okay, his stories focuses on human weakness, stupidity and vanities. This is important. He was writing mostly about the Edwardian age, and the Edwardian age in itself was basically a divided society. On one hand we have the elite class, the very rich one, affluent class, and on the other hand we have the poor class suffering from anxieties of war, or we can say some kind of economic slump. So he tried to portray the human weakness, and one more important thing, that in many of his stories we find clash between man versus nature, and how man feels quite helpless when he faces the raw forces of nature. And almost always there is a twist in the end, or we can say in the climax, the reader is basically surprised by the ending. Some of his best known stories, which are collected in two collections, are The Interlopers, the top point I was talking about, man versus nature. Then we have Esme, then we have Tabemoy and Ministers of Grace. These are some of his popular stories. Now let's talk about the present story, The Open Window. The Open Window is a story which has element of humor, which has an element of tension, dramatic sort of tension, and it was first published in the collection Beasts and Super Beasts, and published in 1914. It was the year in which First World War began, and the story is, very popular once again because of the element of surprise. How the reader as well as the main character, they are thinking about something else and something else happens. So it's a very interesting story. Let's briefly talk about what it is about, what is in the story. In very 3 lines, let me sum up. A stressed, a nervous man, a man suffering from nervous breakdown, he visits a remote place which he has never visited before. Then what happens? He meets a girl who tells him a tragic family story. This is, we can say, the setting of the atmosphere, and in the end, the surprising end, the man experiences a spooky sight. So The Open Window has all the element of a fantastic story. If we talk about characters, the main character is Frampton Nuttall. He is rather a bore, a nervous man visiting a place for recuperation of his health. Then we have Miss Sappleton, the woman whom Frampton paid visit to. He goes to this particular area to visit this the house of this woman, and she is the central character, Vera. Vera is the central character, and Mrs. Sappleton's mischievous niece, and she has great storytelling power. The story begins with our introduction to Frampton Nuttall, who is going through a low nervous phase, and he is visiting a place to regain his healthy mental state. Actually, his sister has given him letters of introduction for Mrs. Sappleton, and as such he comes to her house for a formal meeting. His sister has basically told him that he should go and socialize, meet some new people so that he can recover from his nervous state. Now what happens is he is greeted at this house not by the lady of the house but by Vera. She is a 15-year-old niece of Mrs. Sappleton, and she informs Nuttall that her aunt will see him shortly. At present only two these characters are there, the niece, and who is very self-possessed, very calm, and very, we can say, a child with great ability. Vera then starts talking with him and comes to know that Frampton is a total stranger here, and he has not any knowledge about this family or the village. Now she comes to know about why he is visiting this particular place. Waiting for Mrs. Sappleton, Vera in general talk informs him of the tragedy that happened 3 years ago. To this particular family this tragedy happens, and then she draws his attention to the open window. It is here that we come across the title of the story, an open window, and she draws his attention to this particular window and then tells him the tragic story. 3 years ago, what is the tragic story? 3 years ago, Miss Sappleton's husband and her two brothers had gone for shooting, but they all got drowned in a bog in a nearby area along with their brown spaniel dog, and never returned. So this is the tragedy which Vera tells Frampton that had occurred with the family. Now Vera further tells him that her aunt, she was never able to recover from the shock and still thinks that the whole party will return one day. She is not able to basically digest the fact that her husband has not returned. Whole 3 years have been passed. This is why Mrs. Sappleton keeps the window open even in this hot and humid atmosphere. It used to be their accustomed way to enter the house. Dear friends, let me tell you here briefly, a French window is basically just like a door. It has a glass, we can say, encasement and a partition. So don't be surprised thinking that a family or team entering the house from French window. Vera goes on talking about that fateful day, adding details about their dress up, how her uncle was dressed up on that particular day, what he was wearing, and how Mrs. Sappleton's brother, he was teasing her with a particular song which he whistles. All these details she goes on to add. And then Frampton was feeling quite uneasy listening to all these details. You can understand that he has visited the house, he is himself suffering from a sort of nervous state, but he is listening to the sad story, and finally Mrs. Sappleton enters the room and greets him. Frampton becomes more uneasy after her appearance because the lady, she introduced and she apologized for being late, but when she begins to talk about her husband and brothers, and as if she is expecting them to return soon. So, in confirmation to Vera's story, Miss Sepulton shows that she is eagerly waiting for the hunting party and they may return anytime and from that particular window. She even comments that how they always basically come with dirty feet and she doesn't allow them entry from the main gate. Though Frampton tries to distract her from the topic, he is not interested. He begins to talk about his own illness, but Miss Sepulton continues to look into the direction of the open window, and this particular act of her makes Frampton quite uncomfortable. Now comes the interesting part of the story. Then, to the complete horror of Frampton, the lady suddenly announces the return of the shooting party with unhidden joy. You can imagine a man is listening to a story about three people who have died 3 years ago. Now the one of them, she says, "Oh, I can see them coming from the window." You can imagine the horror Frampton must have witnessed at that time. In his nervous state, Frampton looks at the Vera, but she is also looking at the open window with eyes full of dazed horror. Vera, when he looks at Vera herself is looking in a state of, we can say, horror, dazed state, because she is not able to believe herself that what her thing has come to be true. Now, what happens that Frampton follows her gaze and observes really 3 figures are coming towards the home along with a spaniel dog in exactly the same dress that Vera has described to him. Even he can listen to the song which Vera has told him the brother was singing at that day. He cannot tolerate this thing. He is not able to get the idea. He, like any other common person, he thinks that really 3 ghosts are appearing from the scene. Frampton can't bear anymore and he takes a full flight from this spooky side, just escaping a collision with a cycle on the way. Mrs. Sepulton is obviously very much amazed by this sudden escape or sudden flight of Frampton, and as the party reaches home, the husband inquires about the stranger who just bolted as having seen a ghost. What an irony! So we come to know that, oh, these are not dead ones, they are the real party. So we come to know the first false story of Vera, how he has deluded her guest. Mrs. Sepulton also had no clue about this inexplicable behavior of Mr. Nuttall, and she seems quite confused herself. But Vera explained it must be the sight of the dog, as the gentleman have told her he had horror of dogs. Another story she yarns. What is yarning? Yarning is making of a story because of the past experience in India where he was posted and he had to spend a night in a grave near Ganges river to escape the hunting dogs. Once again we have another very convincing story told by Vera, this time to her aunt and uncle. The story ends with a very apt remark, which is, we can say, the highlight, the climax of this story, and that is, romance at short notice was her specialty. Dear students, here you have to understand the meaning of romance is not in a typical Bollywood, Hollywood style related with, we can say, relationship between 2 people. Here romance means, it comes from root Roman, which means something new, something exciting, a new sort of experience. So romance, adventurous and exciting story at short notice was her specialty. So dear friend, this is the story, and the story highlights the rich imaginative power of the young girl. She is able to convince Frampton about the tragic incident with her innocent prattle, and after befooling him, she once again makes up a spicy story. The important thing to note here is the additional detail which makes her story quite convincing about the hurried escape of Frampton. The main interest of the story lies in anticipation of some climactic event. What will happen? Is the party is real ghost? And it is only in the last few lines that we come to realize it is all about the inventive, fertile mind of Vera, and then realize, like Frampton, she or he, the reader, is also being beguiled by Vera's story. So here is some key points which you have to keep in your mind when you are going to attempt the question. First, obviously, is the character of Vera, how she is able to frame a story always. Vera's storytelling abilities. 2 times we find her making a story with a spicy detail. Frampton's predicament. We can say he comes to this particular place to get some kind of relief, but he is even more put under mental pressure. But the most important part of this story is this theme of appearance versus reality. What we see and what actually is, the huge difference between these two things are presented in this story. So dear friends, that's all for today, this story. I hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you.